You are sitting across a conference table from a man in a very good suit. He has a folder in front of him. You have been negotiating for 40 minutes, and you are starting to feel the pull toward agreement, any agreement, just to end this. You don't notice it happening. You don't notice him watching for it either. What he has, and you don't, is called a BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. The concept was formalized by Roger Fisher and William Ury at Harvard's program on negotiation in their 1981 book, Getting to Yes. The principle is precise. Your power in any negotiation is not determined by how much you want the deal. It is determined entirely by how good your alternative is if the deal falls apart. He knows his alternative. He walked in with it. You almost certainly did not. In a 2015 study published in Organizational Behavior and Human Decision Processes, researchers found that negotiators who explicitly articulated their BATNA before entering a session achieved settlements averaging 11.4% more favorable than those who hadn't, not because they were more talented, because they had something to walk away to. The man across the table from you has calculated that you don't. Here is the thing that will stay with you. Every significant negotiation you have ever been in, salary, apartment lease, service contract, car purchase, the other side knew their BATNA and yours. They modeled it before you sat down. You were negotiating from inside a system they designed, and nobody told you the system had a name. You are buying a car. The salesperson smiles and says the price is $42,900. Something in you immediately begins calculating from $42,900, not from the car's actual value, not from competing offers, not from your own walkaway number, from $42,900. You negotiate to $39,500 and feel like you won. You lost. Anchoring is one of the most reliably documented cognitive biases in behavioral economics. The effect was first systematically demonstrated by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman in 1974, published in Science under the title Judgment Under Uncertainty, Heuristics and Biases. In their original experiment, a wheel of fortune was spun to produce a random number, and then participants were asked to estimate the percentage of African countries in the UN. The number on the wheel, entirely irrelevant, statistically shifted the estimates. When the wheel landed on 65, the median estimate was 45%. When it landed on 10, the median was 25%. In commercial negotiations, anchoring is not accidental. A 2011 study by Adam Galinsky at Columbia Business School found that first offers disproportionately determine final outcomes, and that extreme anchors, even ones the other party openly rejected as absurd, still dragged the settlement toward them. The $42,900 sticker doesn't represent the car's value. It represents the gravitational field they are pulling you into. The counter is to anchor yourself before you enter. Do the research. Establish your own reference point from invoice pricing, market comparables, and your BATNA. The moment you accept their anchor as the starting point of the conversation, you have already moved into their territory without taking a single step. The deal is done. You both leaned back. The handshake is imminent. You feel the relief of agreement washing through you, the emotional exhale that comes after any sustained tension. Then the other side says, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and you'll include the onboarding support in that, right? Just basic stuff. Shouldn't be an issue." This is called the Nibble. It is a technique documented extensively in negotiation training literature and attributed in formal sales methodology to Herb Cohen's 1980 book, You Can Negotiate Anything. The strategic logic is clean. A concession extracted immediately after agreement is psychologically cheap for the demander and psychologically expensive to refuse for you. You are post-decision. Your cognitive resistance is depleted. Refusal now feels like reopening a closed deal, socially costly, emotionally exhausting. The nibbler knows this. The nibble is never the first ask, it is always the last. In a 2017 analysis of commercial contract negotiations reviewed by the International Association for Contract and Commercial Management, the nibble was identified as a statistically significant mechanism in 31% of deals where one party reported post-deal dissatisfaction with the terms. They didn't realize what had happened during the negotiation. They only knew the final terms felt worse than expected. The defense is a complete psychological reset before any one more thing request. Treat it as if the negotiation has just restarted, because it has. The procurement officer across from you sighs, genuinely apologetically, and says, "Look, I love what you're proposing, but we have a hard budget cap of $80,000. I genuinely cannot go beyond that. I wish I could." You believe him. He seems disappointed. You begin restructuring your offer around $80,000. The bogey is a fabricated constraint deployed as a factual ceiling. It is not a negotiating position. It is presented as an immovable fact of the universe, an organizational rule beyond his control that he is powerless to change. And because it is framed as an objective condition rather than a preference, your instinct is to accept it and problem solve within it, instead of testing whether it is real. Chester Karrass, one of the foremost negotiation researchers of the 20th century, documented the bogey systematically in his 1970 work, The Negotiating Game. His field research, conducted across hundreds of commercial negotiations, found that invented budget constraints were accepted as factual by counterparts in the majority of cases tested, and that when the counterpart simply asked for documentation of the constraint, the bogey collapsed, or the ceiling suddenly had some flexibility after all. The phrase that defeats the bogey is 4 words. What happens if we don't? Not aggressive, not accusatory, just genuinely curious. You are asking what the organizational consequence of non-deal actually is. If the constraint is real, there is an answer. If it is a bogey, the silence that follows will tell you everything you need to know. There are 2 of them across from you. One is warm, reasonable, almost apologetic. He seems to be on your side, frustrated by the situation, genuinely trying to help you get to yes. The other is harder, less flexible, occasionally impatient. At one point, the warm one leans in and says quietly, "Look, I'm trying to help you here. Work with me." And you feel grateful for him. The good cop, bad cop structure does not need to be theatrical to work. The bad cop does not need to pound the table. Both roles can be played in measured, professional tones, and the dynamic remains intact. The bad cop establishes the frame of difficulty and risk. The good cop offers relief within a constrained space that was created by the bad cop. The relief feels genuine because there is genuine emotional contrast, and the space you are being offered relief into was designed before you sat down. Researchers at the University of Oregon published a study in the Journal of Applied Social Psychology in 1975, examining the psychological mechanics of the technique, finding that subjects who perceived one authority figure as hostile and another as sympathetic showed elevated compliance with the sympathetic figure's requests, even when those requests were objectively more costly than what was available through a single neutral negotiator. When you notice the dynamic, it loses almost all of its power. The warm one is not your ally. They are your closer. Every concession he's helping you understand you should make was placed there by the hard one. Name it internally. This is a staged division of roles. Then address both of them as a unit, not individually. This pricing is only valid through end of business Friday. You have until Friday. The clock has started. Time has been weaponized against your capacity to think clearly and explore alternatives, and you did not set the clock. They did. Artificial time pressure is one of the most effective negotiation levers in documented commercial practice because urgency physically degrades decision quality. A 2014 paper by Iris Mouse and Michael Robinson at UC Berkeley, reviewing neuroscientific and behavioral evidence on time pressure effects, found that high urgency framing activated stress responses that measurably narrowed the range of alternatives a person considered before deciding. Fewer alternatives considered meant less leverage extracted and more concessions made. The false deadline is structurally different from a real deadline because it is manufactured. Real deadlines have organizational or logistical causes, a board meeting, a fiscal quarter close, a regulatory filing date. False deadlines are set to create time pressure in you, not because anything organizationally requires resolution by that date. Chester Karrass estimated, based on his negotiation research, that in the vast majority of cases where a deadline-constrained negotiation was allowed to pass the deadline without a deal, the deadline either extended or the deal remained available at the original terms. When you receive a deadline, ask what causes it. What happens on Friday if we haven't agreed? Not hostile, just genuinely curious about the organizational mechanism. The explanation will tell you whether the urgency is structural or theatrical. They have just given you something. It was not something you expected. You feel the psychological weight of it, the reciprocity pull, the social contract that says a gift requires a gift in return. You did not ask for what they gave you. They offered it, and now you feel obligated. Strategic concessions are not signs of flexibility. They are calibrated moves designed to trigger reciprocity. The social norm of reciprocity, the deep human sense that a gift creates a debt, was documented by anthropologist Marcel Mauss in his 1925 work, The Gift, and its negotiation applications were formalized by Robert Cialdini in Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, 1984. Cialdini demonstrated through field experiments that concessions offered voluntarily, even small ones, produce disproportionately large compliance responses from counterparties. The technique's power comes from the voluntary framing. If they had demanded a concession from you, you would resist, but they gave first, unsolicited, generously. And the internal logic of reciprocity says you owe something of approximately equal or greater value. Your brain does this calculation automatically, without asking your permission. What they gave up was planned to be given. What you feel compelled to give in return was the actual target. The counter is to evaluate any concession on its own merits, not on the basis of what was given to generate it. Ask, is this trade good for me? Not, do I owe them something for what they just did? They open with a number so outrageous that your first instinct is to laugh. $180,000 for what you priced at $60,000. Or conversely, they offer you $8,000 for an item you know is worth $35,000. The opening number is so far from reality that you immediately recalibrate. And in recalibrating, you anchor. The highball, as seller, and lowball, as buyer, are first-offer strategies designed not to succeed on their own terms, but to shift the zone of possible agreement in the user's favor. The conceptual foundation is the same anchoring effect Tversky and Kahneman documented, but the extremity is intentional. Research by Adam Galinsky and Thomas Mussweiler, published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology in 2001, found that extreme first offers produced settlements consistently more favorable to the opener than moderate first offers, because the extreme number reset the psychological midpoint of the negotiation before any real bargaining began. The specific mechanism is the counter-anchoring problem. When you receive a highball, your instinct is to give a counter that feels reasonable relative to theirs, say half of their number. but half of their absurd number is still well inside their target range. They have successfully moved your reasonable by manipulating what the reference point for absurdity is. The response is to ignore their number entirely and counter from your own independently established anchor. I understand that's your opening. Here's what the research shows about market value, and here's my position. You are resetting the gravitational field, not orbiting theirs. No single ask is unreasonable. That's the entire mechanism. They want 7 things. They ask for 1. You agree, it's reasonable. They ask for another, still reasonable, then another. By the time you realize how far you have moved, the sum of all the reasonable requests is completely unreasonable, and there is no single moment you can point to where you should have said no. The salami technique takes its name from the method of acquiring something one thin slice at a time. It was described formally in negotiation theory by Gerard Nierenberg in his 1968 book, The Art of Negotiating, and has been documented across commercial contract negotiations, labor disputes, and political negotiation studies. The approach exploits the psychological fact that people evaluate concessions in isolation, not cumulatively. Each slice is evaluated against a baseline of what was agreed so far, not against the original intended position. A 2019 study in Negotiation Journal examining complex multi-issue negotiations found that counterparties who deployed sequential single-issue asking consistently achieved better cumulative outcomes than those who presented multiple issues simultaneously, because integrated package negotiations allow counterparties to make clear trade-offs, while sequential negotiations obscure the cumulative cost. The defense is to track position cumulatively from your original baseline, not from your most recent agreement. Before each new ask, run the total. Where was I when this started, and where am I now? That number will tell you what the slices have added up to. You have just made your offer. It is a fair offer. You are confident in it. They look at you and say nothing. 3 seconds pass. 5, 8. The silence expands into the room and begins applying pressure to your chest. You can hear yourself starting to justify the number before they have said a single word. You are about to start negotiating against yourself. Silence as a deliberate negotiation tool has been documented in professional training literature since at least the 1970s. Jim Camp, in his 2002 book, Start with No, described it as one of the most powerful and underused levers available to any negotiator. The party who speaks first after an offer is made is nearly always the party who moves first. What silence does, neurologically, is create ambiguity. And ambiguity in a social context is uncomfortable enough that most people will resolve it by talking, by justifying, softening, adding, conceding. A 2016 study published in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology by researchers at the University of Amsterdam found that induced pauses in negotiation conversations reliably caused the party that had just spoken to revise their position in a more concessive direction, even when the pause was entirely neutral and the opposing party had not yet expressed any reaction at all. The discomfort of unresolved silence was sufficient to generate movement without any actual pushback. The thing is, they may genuinely be thinking, or they are waiting for you to break. There is no way to tell from inside the experience, which is exactly the point. The discipline is to sit in the silence, let it be theirs, and wait. The offer you just made was fair. It does not need your help. Let it stand.